name is Clarice Delgado. I am a senior at UW-Madison. I'm double majoring in legal studies and French, and I am very fortunate to say that I'm a student intern at CCTW, and I'm very pleased to introduce here Lydia. Lydia Odegard serves as a language directionist specialist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison Language Institute. In this role, she advances language learning opportunities across campus by partnering with both campus and community stakeholders. Lydia also provides tailored support to multilingual students, helping them to connect their language skills to personal, academic, and career goals. She holds a master's in educational leadership, policy analysis, specializing in global higher education from UW-Madison. Lydia brings a strong background in language teaching, academic advising, and international education, and she's fluent in Hindi and conversational in Spanish. So here you go, Lydia.
Hello, everyone. I'm happy to be here with you on this election day. I am going to quickly share my slides here. Hey, so I am here to talk a little bit about the work that I do and how I promote language skills in career development. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of where we're headed today, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about what my role is and the institutional context that I'm coming from here at UW-Madison. I will talk a little bit about why my role exists, why it's important to have career services for language and humanities students. And then I'll talk about how I do the work that I do. So what kinds of resources and events and services I offer and the strategies that I utilize in my work. And then finally, we'll talk about what you might be able to do in your institutional context. What might you be able to take away from some of the aspects of the work that I do. So as Claudia mentioned in my introduction, I am the language direction specialist at the Language Institute. The Language Institute is a unit within the College of Letters and Science at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. It was founded in 2004 to enable and promote collaboration in research, education, and outreach related to the study of human languages. So at the Language Institute, our foci are excellence in language teaching, innovation in the design and delivery of effective and inclusive language programs, student success in reaching their professional and personal language learning goals, research in applied language studies, and increased awareness of the value of linguistic diversity and of language and intercultural learning for all. So kind of within those general goals of the Language Institute, I am most focused on a few different things. One is career services for language students and multilingual students. So what that looks like is I do career advising, individual career advising appointments with students who identify as multilingual. I also do pre-major advising for students who are interested in languages but don't really know where to start and want to kind of talk to someone about what are my options, how might I decide on a language or languages to learn, after which point I'll often refer them out to individual advisors in language departments. Another aspect of my role is programming and events that support career development for language students, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about later. And then finally, I do outreach and communications for our language programs at UW-Madison. So what that looks like is some K-12 outreach activities to inform K-12 students of opportunities to study language at UW. And then also communications work that is kind of focused on making folks aware of language program offerings at UW-Madison and also advocating for the value of multilingualism and language study as a whole. So some of those little bubbles around the aspects of my role represent many of the questions that I address with students, which I'm going to get into a little bit more later as well. But I work with students all across campus at UW-Madison. They can be in any major, any field of study. I also, work, of course, with language students, whether they are particularly majoring in a language, getting a certificate in a language, or just studying a language as kind of a supplement to their other fields of study. And then I also work with any multilingual student, whether they are an international student, whether they learned language through a home environment. So really anyone who identifies as multilingual. So just to give you a bit of background on the institutional context that I'm coming from. So at UW-Madison, one of our favorite words to describe how we operate is decentralized. So that includes our career services. We have many different career services offices. Um, every school and college has their own career services, and then many individual majors also have their own career services. So I'm operating within this kind of really big web of many career services providers on campus, but I work across all schools and colleges. In terms of language study, UW-Madison is very unique when it comes to public institutions. We offer over 50 languages during the academic year and additional less commonly taught languages in the summer. In 2016 to 2017 academic year, UW-Madison awarded more bachelor's degrees in languages other than English than any other public institution in the nation. So we have a lot of really robust support for language study on our campus and a lot of students who are really engaged in language learning. Despite that institutional support for language study, we are experiencing declining enrollments in almost every language on campus, despite the fact that our incoming class size has been increasing over the past many years. Enrollments in languages are declining. That said, we do have a strong population and representation of people on our campus who use languages other than English. So although we are a predominantly white institution and Wisconsin maybe has this reputation for not holding a lot of diversity, we do have many students, staff, faculty on our campus who are multilingual. Just as kind of a representation of that, 10% of our undergraduates are international students, and while not all of those, we can't say for sure that all of those students are multilingual. Almost all of them are coming from countries where language is not the predominant language used. And we, of course, have a large, sizable population of students on our campus who are coming from households where they grew up speaking languages other than English. So we do have a large representation of multilingualism on our campus. So as I mentioned, we're experiencing decline in enrollments in languages, but this is not a unique trend to UW-Madison. So the Modern Language Association puts out a report every few years that documents enrollments in languages other than English across US higher education institutions. And the most recent data that we have from this report is documents enrollments up to 2021. As you can see, enrollments have been sharply declining over the past several years. So there has been quite a bit of speculation, questioning about what has been leading to these changes in enrollments. And many scholars have attempted to kind of understand this decline, including at our own university. So the director of my office, Diana Murphy, she and other colleagues surveyed UW-Madison students in 2019, and the results of their survey they published into an article in 2022 titled "Why U.S. Undergraduate Students Are, in parentheses, Not Studying Languages Other than English." And one of the biggest takeaways from this study is that students both studying and not studying languages indicated that they would be more likely to continue language study or start language study if employers were conveying that they value skills in languages other than English. So this was a pretty telling kind of indication of how we might, as practitioners, as language educators, as academic advisors, frame language study as being relevant to students' future career plans. So the findings from this study should not surprise us. Enrollment trends in languages are situated within the broader narratives about the humanities that we are really constantly bombarded with in the US and what the humanities potential or lack thereof might be for career outcomes. So students are really surrounded by the types of narratives that we see on this screen that are really prominent in media about, whether humanities are or are not valuable for a future career. And these messages are coming from friends and family as well. So this is really a broader kind of trend in the messaging that is impacting students' decisions about what to study and how that might relate to their future career. And I'll say too, messages are being reinforced about the humanities by what news sources are not saying about the humanities. So you see in the bottom left corner here, we have from our very own UW News, an article titled UW's 5 Hottest Certificates, Students Seek Skills with Real World Value. The 5 hottest certificates listed that have experienced significant growth in the past several years did not include any humanities certificates. And, we can't help the fact that enrollment trends are not increasing in the humanities, but the way that those enrollment trends are being framed can be problematic in how we're thinking about what is real world value and how do we kind of reframe the humanities as having real world value. So that brings me to why does language matter? And can we say that it has real world value when we're having conversations with students? And we do have quite a bit of data that really points to the value of language skills and how those skills can be valuable in future employment. So this data is from the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. They conducted a study and published a report in 2019 called Making Languages Our Business. And they surveyed employers about their demand for language skills in the US. And I find a lot of this data really compelling as evidence for the demand for language skills among employers in the US. So in the top left corner, we see that 9 out of 10 of the employers that they surveyed report a reliance on skills, language skills other than English. 56% of the surveyed employers were saying that their language demand will increase in the next 5 years. And what I find particularly compelling as well is in the bottom left corner, we see this chart indicating US employers' need for languages both domestically and internationally. And 47% of those employers indicated that they have a domestic need for language skills. And I think that we have this tendency to see language skills as being valuable only abroad or in an international context. But US employers are saying, no, we need language skills other than English right here in a domestic context. Beyond this kind of really specific data about the need for language skills in particular, we have really robust data from the National Association of Colleges and Employers, which I imagine many of you are familiar with. In their annual job outlook report, they publish a list of attributes that employers most often seek on a candidate's resume. And over the past few years, many of these attributes have remained fairly consistent. And this is data that I come back to time and time again when I'm working with students. The skills that I have highlighted with an asterisk are skills that I see as being very relevant to language study. Ability to work in a team, communication skills, strong work ethic, flexibility, adaptability, analytical skills, initiative, detail-oriented, interpersonal skills. Just to give a few examples of how some of these might relate to language skills. Initiative, it takes a lot of initiative to decide to learn a language, to put in that time and effort to be self-motivated to study a language. Interpersonal skills, that's a pretty obvious one. When you're using a language, you are taking the time to see something from another person's perspective, to put on a different lens to the way you see the world. And that really shows a motivation to relate well with others. Problem-solving skills, when you have limited vocabulary, when you're learning a language, you need to think creatively about how to solve maybe a communication barrier that you're experiencing and work around some of those limitations that you might have. Flexibility and adaptability, that's another one when you're using a language and you maybe are struggling to communicate what you are trying to convey. You have to be flexible and adapt accordingly when you're using that language. So those are just a few examples, but any number of these that I have starred can be, I would argue, related to language skills. So, given kind of this problem that I've outlined of the fact that language skills and related transferable skills are valuable and employers are saying they're valuable, but students don't necessarily see them that way, how do I address this gap or this issue in my work? So the first kind of strategy that I use is individual advising appointments. So I work with students who, as I mentioned, have all sorts of career aspirations. They're in every school and college on our campus. One of the most common things I work with students on is how they can include language on their resumes. And I'm gonna go a little bit more into detail on that, but for now, I'll just say that it's really common for students to not know how to fully express the extent of their language skills on a resume. So I also help students reflect on what are they gaining through their language study and how can they be valuable in any industry? How can they incorporate this reflection on the value of their skills into their personal brand? So just as a few examples of maybe some students who I've worked with that you might not expect would necessarily seek out my services, I worked with a student who was interested in genetic counseling. And I talked to her about, how might your German language skills relate to the kind of skills that a graduate school is looking for in a prospective genetic counselor? How might your ability to empathize with different perspectives, see things through different lenses, be a valuable asset to you as a future genetic counselor? I worked with a student on a pre-med path who was interested in rural medicine, and she was interested in returning to the community where she came from in Wisconsin, where there's a high population of Spanish speakers. And we talked a lot about, how can you utilize your Spanish skills, even if you might be in a situation where you have an interpreter, how might your language skills still be really valuable in connecting really deeply with your patients and your community? So that's just to say that, I work with a lot of language majors and students who have a very direct link between their language skills and their career aspirations. But then I work with students all over the board to kind of help them make sense of their language study or their multilingualism and how that might fit into their future career plans. I also help students identify jobs and internships that incorporate language skills. A lot of times students kind of don't know where to start with that process or don't know how to identify, are my language skills advanced enough for this type of position? And if not, how can I work towards a level of proficiency that would allow me to work in this type of role? And then another thing that I work with frequently with students is finding positions abroad. So a lot of students are interested in working abroad post-graduation, and that can be a really challenging process to navigate. So I meet with students very regularly who come to me for advice on different kinds of industries that are maybe more straightforward in finding work abroad through, or finding different programs that they might consider. So just to zoom in a little bit more on how I work with students to put language on their resumes. So it's very common for not just students, but for anyone to list their language skills, maybe under a skills section, and then describe their language skills with one-word descriptors like native or fluent or intermediate. Um, the problem with these descriptors is that these can be really subjective. One person might see intermediate and have a totally different perception of what that means than another person. So I work with students on thinking about how they can really elaborate on their language skills in a way that shows an employer exactly what they could do in a context if they were required to use those skills. So, students hear the phrase "show me, don't tell me" a lot when they're working on writing, for example, and that's something that I tell students when they're working on language on their resume. Show me what you can do with your skills. Don't just tell me that you're intermediate or fluent. So I have an example on the bottom half of the screen here where the language skills section is more fleshed out. So in this student's case, they listed Spanish and they used the word advanced, but then they go on to qualify what does advanced mean when I say advanced. And they flesh out those bullet points. They have 2 bullet points. The first says, exchange information and ideas in discussions on a variety of academic and social topics. And the second is provide explanations and comparisons and negotiate to resolve problems. So that gives you a much more clear picture of what this student could do if they were put into a situation where they needed to use their language skills. And I would argue it also helps catch an employer's attention more if they see this section more fully fleshed out. So I do have a guide that I use with students that I have linked on these slides, and I'll make sure to share these with, or that these slides get shared with you all so you can access the links after this webinar. But just to show you what this guide looks like, I have this self-evaluation guide that students can use to kind of assess what is my language proficiency, and how might I be able to describe that on a resume. So this is something that you can look at more on your own if you're interested. So beyond individual advising appointments, I host events and programming throughout the academic year. And many of these events are open to any student on campus who wants to attend. I do also do some more specific collaborations with campus partners. I've done workshops for groups like the International Learning Community on campus. I've done a workshop with our language tutors through our campus tutoring services. Every spring semester, I work with a professor in Japanese who teaches a business Japanese communication course, and I collaborate with her on a workshop. But most of the events that I do are open to any student on campus. So as an example, just a few examples of events that I do. I host alumni panels, usually at least once a year. And I try to get a broad representation of alumni who have studied many different languages. Spanish is the most common language that students study on campus, but I try to really get a wide representation so that I can attract students from all sorts of language backgrounds through those panels. I do an event called Language Careers Beyond Translation that I collaborate with the College of Letters and Sciences Career Services Office SuccessWorks on. And as the title might suggest, we are trying to kind of show students that there are possibilities for using your language skills in a career that are not just being a translator or interpreter, because that is kind of a common misconception that many language students have. I collaborate with our international internships team in our study abroad office on an event called Launching Your International Career. So as I mentioned, many students that I work with are interested in working abroad, and we try to kind of demystify that process and give students some tools for finding opportunities globally. I do a workshop called Putting Your Language Skills to Work that is kind of focused on helping students articulate and identify what the skills that they're gaining through their language study are. And I've also done a career panel that is focused on translation and interpreting. So while I try to kind of dispel the myth that translation and interpreting is the only thing you can do with language skills, I recognize that there are a lot of students who are interested in those fields. So I've done a career panel that features folks working in those industries to provide students with insight as to what it involves and how to get there. I've also developed several digital resources that are housed on the website that I manage, and I'm going to show you a little bit of what those look like. So one of those is a guide that I've put together called the Language Careers Guide. And this guide is really intended to be kind of a broad level overview of what kinds of careers can I consider that incorporate language skills. So I've divided them up into these industries, and within each of the industries, I provide sample areas where students can find opportunities to use their language skills. So I offer resources for exploration, advice on how students can prepare to be competitive in those fields. And then I also link to alumni profiles that I have housed on my website. So students can get an idea of what are UW language alumni doing in this field and what kind of advice might they have for me. So this is publicly available if it's something you're interested in looking more into. I have it linked on the slides here. And another resource that I maintain on this website are language alumni profiles. So I again have them grouped by industry, and I did some pretty extensive outreach to alumni last year to identify folks working across industries and ask them to fill out profiles. So this is another tool that I use to kind of connect students to stories of what professionals are doing in various fields and how their language skills have benefited them professionally. And then the final kind of aspect of my work that I want to highlight is a course that I teach called Lead with Languages, Putting Language Skills to Work. So this is a 1-credit course. It is intended for any multilingual student, as all of my services are. And the course content is really based on programming that I already do in my role, but in a more piecemeal way. So the course is intended to kind of give students an opportunity to engage in really extended reflection on how they can leverage their language skills professionally. So the course learning outcomes are, the first one is to develop understanding of demand for multilingual talent in a variety of career fields and become familiar with institutions, organizations, and companies that support language and career connections. The second is to identify personal strengths and interest areas related to language skills and utilize campus resources, alumni contacts, and informational interviewing to explore career options. The third is learn how to articulate and emphasize language and intercultural skills to improve upon online presence, resume, cover letter, and interviewing opportunities. And the fourth is to articulate orally and in writing skills and abilities for self-promotion through direct connection of classroom activity to real-world job opportunities. So the course is divided into different topics and sequences. So just to give you kind of an overview of what those topics are and what we do in each of those. Our first few weeks are focused on why language matters. So we have a discussion about future readiness skills and how language skills relate to both transferable skills and then the demand for multilingual talent in the US. We spend a week reflecting on identity. So I ask students to consider how their social identities might impact their career development and how they can bring those social identities into a professional context. We spend a few weeks thinking about how students can tell their story. So in this section, they start to define who they are. What are their strengths, values, interests, and purpose? I ask them to connect all of these aspects of who they are to their multilingualism. And then they learn how to apply this self-knowledge to storytelling techniques. So they learn self-promotion skills that they can apply to scenarios like job interviews or networking conversations. Next, we start to explore careers that are related to language, and students think about what have their life experiences been that have been meaningful for them, and how might those relate to their career interests, and how does language relate or not relate to those career interests. And they learn more specifically about different industries that they can explore that directly utilize language skills. We also do an alumni panel in this section of the course where students learn directly from professionals in many different fields about how language study has benefited them professionally. Then we move on to articulation of skills, interests, and goals. So in this section, we focus on how students can weave their language and intercultural experiences into resumes and cover letters, and how they can highlight the transferable skills that they've gained through their language-related experiences in these documents. And then we also focus a lot on how students can expand their language skills section using the strategies that I discussed earlier in this webinar. Next, we focus on building your network and understanding social capital. So we explore networking through the lens of social capital. And I ask students to think about what kinds of social capital do they already possess and how can those be useful for them in their career development. But then I also ask them to expand their network and their social capital by completing an informational interview with a professional who's using language in their career. During this section, we also do a speed networking session where I invite guests from both campus and the greater Madison community who represent opportunities that value language skills in various industries. And during the speed networking event, students have an opportunity to network in a really low stakes and informal setting and hear directly from professionals in the field. And then finally, in our last few weeks, we focus on post-graduation planning. So students explore graduate school and gap year opportunities. And we also focus more on interviewing in this section. So they think about what comes next for them and how do their language skills relate to those next steps. And also, how can they weave their language skills and related transferable skills into interview strategies. And their final project is a portfolio that includes a cover letter, a resume, and a mock interview. So I know that, I have a very specific role and a lot of time to do things that you might not have the ability or resources to do in your context. That said, I truly believe that you don't have to be an expert on language skills or career opportunities related to language to support students in validating their language skills in your context. So I have a few ideas for how you might kind of bring some of the aspects of my work into your position and your context. The first is to start recognizing language. And one suggestion I have within this is avoid using the term foreign when speaking about languages. So the reason I say this is because language skills, languages other than English are very active in the US, across the country, on our campus, as I mentioned earlier. Languages other than English are not foreign. They are alive and well in communities in our countries. And ask students about their language skills. Maybe you're working with students and you don't even realize that they have skills in languages other than English. So start talking to them about how they're making sense of their skills, how they might start to reflect on the value of those skills if they haven't already. And within recognizing languages too, I want to mention that all language skills are valuable. So I come from the position that there is no one language that is inherently more useful or more valuable than another. Yes, we have certain languages in our country that are, more widely spoken than others, but that doesn't mean that one language is going to be inherently more valuable for someone's career than another. Within this too, a student doesn't have to be majoring in a language for their language abilities to hold potential for their future career. This is something that I have a lot of conversations with students about because on the UW-Madison campus, there is no minor or certificate, as we call it here at UW-Madison, for Spanish for students who are not in the business school. So only students in the business school can earn a minor or certificate in Spanish. And that causes a lot of questions and concerns for students who want to continue studying Spanish, but feel like if they can't get a certificate, it's not going to be valuable. I really try to help students understand that you don't need this stamp on your resume that says you have a major or a certificate in a language for your skills to be valuable. I think a lot of us probably encounter students who feel like, they need to kind of rack up all these majors or certificates in order for employers to kind of value those skills that they've been gaining. But I would encourage you to have conversations with students about how can your skills be valuable even if you don't have a major or certificate in that language. The second idea I have for you is engage more intentionally with multilingual alumni. So if you are planning activities that involve alumni, think about how you can incorporate alumni who have language skills into your outreach activities, and how might you encourage those alumni to kind of explicitly speak to the value of those skills, again, regardless of what industry they're in. The third recommendation is to consider how language skills show up on resumes. So as I said before, I do a lot of work with students on how they can go beyond one-word descriptors. You might find it interesting to look at that resume guide I have that's linked on the slides to think about how might you encourage students to go beyond one-word descriptors on their resume and really flesh out that section of their resume so that they're fully representing their skills to employers. The fourth recommendation I have is to see multilingualism as a central component of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I find this particularly relevant for students who are coming from home environments where they grew up speaking languages other than English, as well as for international students. Many of these students have experienced discrimination based on their language backgrounds. Just as an example, many students might have experienced people pointing out that they're using English incorrectly, or that their grammar isn't good, or that they can't be understood because they're speaking with a quote unquote accent. So I really encourage you to, when working with multilingual students, validate the skills that they are bringing to professional environments and validate them as an asset that they can bring to any professional organization. So I've put together just a few reflection questions that might be helpful as you're considering how can I incorporate this lens into my work. The first one is to ask yourself, how do I approach conversations with language students or other multilingual students? Um, how does the topic of language skills come into our conversations? Or maybe it's not, which is okay, but how might you start to incorporate conversations about language into your conversations with students? The second is, what additional tools, resources, or information do I need to better understand career paths available or opportunities related to language skills? Maybe you need to do some research on your own, or maybe it would be helpful for you to talk to me more about the work that I do or other colleagues. And then the third is, what is one small step that I can take to validate or help students explore the skills that they bring to a professional environment through their multilingualism? So you don't have to overhaul your whole way of interacting with multilingual students, but think about maybe there's one small thing that you can do to incorporate just this lens of multilingualism into your work with students. So this wraps up the presentation portion of the webinar, and I would love to hear if any of you have questions about any of the work that I do or ideas for your contexts. So I will open up the floor for questions now.
Thank you so much, Lydia, for your presentation. I'm just going to read the questions that are in the Q&A, and that way our audience who's joining us in the video afterwards that we post to our website can hear the questions. So the question that has been posted so far is there any possible way that I can get an application fee waiver?
Do you know like what kind of application fee?
I'm not sure.
Okay, yeah.
So this was an anonymous attendee. So
Okay.
whomever posted that question, if you can put more information, maybe we can answer that question either here or offline. We're happy to help with that. And we can connect you from CCWT as well. Other questions for Lydia? This was an amazing presentation. Your job is, I don't think people necessarily, I think students especially don't connect those skills always. They don't necessarily see them as an advantage always, because I think sometimes they receive messaging in the community that they're not a benefit as they're growing up. They receive the message that sometimes they're less than in some cases, and that's unfortunate because it is a huge skill to have, to be able to speak more than one language, or a language that is not English.
Absolutely.
How do you, this is another question. Thank you, Allison. How do you encourage students to pursue a major or double major in a language? It says at UW-Milwaukee, there's a lot of importance to put on the number of majors a program has.
Yeah, that's a great question. So one of the responsibilities I have in my role is to be present at our student orientation, advising, and registration, which occurs over the summer, throughout the summer for incoming students. And I have a table there where I represent language programs at UW-Madison, and that's kind of one of the main outreach activities that I do to encourage the study of languages. I think a common misconception that students have at UW-Madison is if I'm majoring in a STEM major, I won't have time for a language major. And one of the statistics that I like to share with students when they come to me with that misconception is on the UW-Madison campus, our most popular double major combination is biology and Spanish. And I think that really speaks to how doable it is to incorporate language study into any other additional academic interests that you have. Of course, I can't speak for other institutions and the doability of that kind of combination at other schools, but at least at UW-Madison, it's very common for students in STEM fields to also be majoring in a language. So it might be helpful for your context to kind of look at some of the data on, what might some of those common double major combinations be, or maybe even creating materials that kind of create a sample plan for how a language major might fit into a major in another field of study.
Okay. And I'm going to connect the person who had asked about the application fee waiver. I'm going to connect with them offline, I think, because they're very specific questions.
Sounds good.
Other questions for Lydia? So Claire Peters, not a question, but a comment. It makes me sad when I meet with a student who plans to major in a language and who also says, but I need another major. I can't just major in insert language.
Yes, absolutely. I encounter that a lot in my role as well. And I mean, Claire, since you work at UW-Madison, you're always welcome. Yes, you send them to me. That's great. Yeah, so that's where I think, for example, the alumni profiles that I've collected are a really good tool to share with students when they come to me with those doubts. Is I tell them, like, just go explore these career paths that folks have taken, and several of them, just quote unquote majored in a language, and they are very successful and fulfilled in their careers.
Yeah. So my daughter is an education major. She's a senior this year, and she was really disappointed because she came in right after they discontinued the minors and the certificates in languages, and she's fluent in Spanish. So and she studied abroad, and so it's really disappointing for her, because now in order to pursue that, she has to do a master's program or a master's certificate. And she does use her language skills in her practicums, and she'll do her student teaching this spring. But it's really interesting that those programs went away. Yeah, just thoughts on that. This is my ADHD brain talking as I think.
Yeah. In the School of Education, I know that they changed that structure recently for students who are interested in teaching language. So yeah.
And she didn't necessarily want to teach language. She just really wanted to be able to sharpen her skills so that if she was working with students who, Spanish was their primary language, she, felt more confident with it. So it's, or you have the dual language immersion program. Sometimes they're going to give preference to people who have those certificates or those minors. So yeah, it's just unfortunate that we're not encouraging that instead of making those programs go away.
Yeah, and that's something that, as I mentioned earlier, like I have a lot of conversations with students about how can your language skills be valuable even if you don't have that like stamp that says you have a certificate or a major. And I try to really dispel the notion that they need that official credential in order for their skills to be valuable. So yeah.
I might have to send her to you, Lydia.
Ah, yes.
Any other questions for Lydia? We still have another 10 minutes. Just a quick question for maybe career advisors or career coaches or any other student support services people who may watch this or who are watching right now, who haven't ever really thought about supporting students in regards to language skills. Like, what are some really super easy things that they could implement in their conversations with students, just, without getting too deep into it? I know that's like a big question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned, like just starting to incorporate conversations about language, regardless of a student's career interests, because it can be a really valuable aspect of a student's experience that really gives them a leg up in the job search. And I think, a lot of students might not realize that if this is something that they can learn to communicate about, and if they can learn to articulate the value of their language skills, they might, be looked at more favorably by employers, and that it's not just this thing that can live on their resume, but something that they can actually learn how to communicate about.
Yeah. I'm just thinking from a person, like, sometimes if you haven't ever had those conversations before, especially if you're not culturally, or you don't feel culturally prepared, sometimes you can be a little nervous about starting that conversation because you might feel like you're overstepping, or you're somehow asking the wrong thing, you know what I mean? So sometimes it might feel weird to ask those questions. Do you have like a question that could get the ball rolling in that sense for someone who's never talked about those things before?
Yeah, so I think as one example, like if you are working with a student who is applying to a specific job and they come to you with this job description that they're looking at, and maybe one of the skills that is that an employer is looking for in a candidate is interpersonal skills. You might ask them like, okay, what kinds of situations do you feel like you can point to that reflect your interpersonal skills? And if that student has a background in language, ask them to think about, okay, how might your language relate to this? How could you talk about your language in a cover letter or an interview? Just as a small example. And
That's a
that
great idea.
kind of puts the onus on the student to define that for themselves. And you don't necessarily have to have any cultural expertise on that particular language or cultural experience, but the student has that own self-knowledge. And oftentimes it just takes that prompting on the advisor's part.
So we have two more questions in the chat. One, or in the Q&A. Sorry about that. I wasn't looking at the chat. Kristen Pitt asked if they can have access to the slides. Would you be willing to share your slides?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So for the audience, when we edit the video, after we edit the video, we upload it to our website. So what I can do is put a link to a PDF of the slides. So we'll do that. And then I have a question from Allison. It says, when you talk to students about double majoring in a language, do you outline how all the degree requirements would look semester by semester?
No, I do not. No, my conversations with them are more so just kind of explaining to them that it's very common for students to major in a language alongside another major. I also talk to them about how, again, this is, UW-Madison specific, so I don't want to speak to your context, but at UW-Madison, many of our majors are within the 30 to 40 credit range, and a full degree is 120 credits. So that kind of framing of, your major is only going to be one portion of all the credits you need to graduate, and that leaves a lot of room for either a second major or adding in language study as a complement to your studies.
Again, a great idea.
And I think too, going back to the alumni profiles, looking at the range of majors that our alumni have graduated with can be a helpful exercise for students to see, oh, this person majored in political science, international studies, and German. And just to kind of model for students the possibilities of how they can create their undergraduate plan.
Yeah. Other questions? One more. All right. Well, it looks like we are all done with questions today. Thank you again so much, Lydia. And everyone, we will, I have a great graphic design and communications assistant that goes ahead and edits all of our videos and uploads them to our website. So we will do that. It will probably be about a week by the time it's all done, but please let us know what you think. Tell Lydia how she did by completing the survey that will pop up as soon as you close this window or close this survey or close this Zoom, sorry. Otherwise, you should receive a reminder email tomorrow after we're all done. So thank you again so much. Check out our website for more events that are coming up, and thanks for your support. Have a great afternoon.
Yeah,
Thanks,
you,
everyone.